Hello, in this video we will discuss about the caffeine stimulation and the caffeine act on our body and the different organ. The caffeine will target the different organ differently and it can be affect positively or negatively, and this is stimulant, and remember, and this will lead to stimulate the human body, and it can be for example, here is the different type of tissue and organ, so the organ system of the person. So let's begin to understand from brain. So the central nervous system and peripheral nervous system, which that will lead to increased mental performance, alertness. It means the more alertness due to the sympathetic nervous system activation, and the reduce the risk of depression. So the depression risk will be decreased. How? Because the dopamine and serotonin will also produce as a parasympathetic activity also. But the initial stages that reduces the Parkinson disease and also induce anxiety due to the initial stage, as well as the initial stage sympathetic nervous system stimulation. But further on, it will become a parasympathetic nervous system. So that stimulate the respiration due to dopamine and serotonin improve and increase the respiration due to the lungs volume increase and the vasoconstriction and vasodilation of the skeletal muscle and in the blood circulatory system, and affect the skeletal muscle contractility more. So it means the ability to do work will be more, and that is why also produce the ATP more, and that is why it is stimulant. But it is also important to note that the reproductive system is also affected by the caffeine. But the excess of caffeine, for example, 3 cup of caffeine, 300 milligram, will lead to infertility in male and female if you consume regularly. So that is the side effect. On the other hand, that effect, which that is basically the normal consumption for the cardiovascular system, we will discuss, and our consumption we will discuss also. So the normal consumption of caffeine is a vasoconstriction. So the vasoconstrictor stimulant, and stimulant increased during the effect time 3 to 4 hours changes the effect physiology of heart rate, and that is lead to 3 to 4 hour is the half life of the caffeine. So the caffeine will target to the nervous system and bind to stimulate the heartbeat more. But our production of the caffeine will heavy caffeine consumption raises the plasma level, remember, of homocysteine, which risk to heart disease. So homocysteine will also produce. And on the other hand, epinephrine and norepinephrine, which that is produced, and that epinephrine, those neurotransmitter epinephrine and norepinephrine will bind with the nervous system also, but also bind with the liver and muscle, skeletal muscle, for the production of glucose. So the glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis will be occur to increase the hyperglycemia will be occur, and the homocysteine will be level it increase, which risk to heart disease. On the other hand, here is effect of the urinary system. So the kidney and urinary system will lead to high dose and diuretic effect. It means the more urination, but the habitual moderate intake and doesn't substantially affect the hydration status. Anyhow, if the overconsumption of the caffeine will lead to loss of water, why? Because the vasopressin decrease, so the antidiuretic hormone will not produce, and vasopressin decrease, so the vasodilation will be occur, lead to more diuretic and lead to loss of solute with water, can cause complication. For example, the hypotension mean the low blood pressure as compared to the normal blood pressure 120 to 80 will lead to decrease to 100 to 60. So the hypoglycemia will be occur. Why? Because the more diuretic will lead to loss of glucose, loss of calcium, loss of sodium and potassium and magnesium, vitamin loss, and lead to nerve damage because the normal function require the calcium, and muscle weakness and fatigue because the potassium, sodium and calcium is very important mineral which that is used for the nerve impulse. So it can lead to damage if the excess caffeine consumption, sorry. So the endocrine system for the muscle is reduces the skeletal muscle insulin sensitivity and in the short term, but the tolerance appears to develop with habitual intake when required. Okay, and in this way, remember that it will be adopt, and the first initial stage for the consumption of caffeine will lead to insensitivity, while the liver which that is used for the reduce the liver cirrhosis and fibrosis and cancer. So the beneficial effect of the liver is this, but the epinephrine will be bind to increase the glycogenolysis. So the catabolism will be occur also. On the other hand, the gastrointestinal tract, which that is stimulate the gastric secretion, so the more production of enzyme, and this enzyme will lead to more digestion. And risk factor can be acid indigestion, heartburn, abdominal pain, gas or constipation to varying the degrees. And in this way there are a lot of things which that is you should need to understand the person to person variation. So there are a lot of differences between person, and in this way you can understand among the person basically all person which that affect differently. So some people will not affect on the digestive system, but some people will affect. So the emesis will be occur. Emesis means the antiperistalsis movement will lead to vomiting. Caffeine can cause emetic reflex due to sympathetic stimulator. So the antiperistalsis movement will lead to outtake of the food. So remember, due to the sympathetic nervous system. Well, let's begin to understand the major concept and effect on the cell. We are going to collectively understand the effect of the tissue, cells, etc. So here is the female which that is giving the cup of coffee to the person, and this here is when drink this coffee will move into the blood circulatory system and bind with the target tissue. Anyhow, when bound with a target tissue, for example, the nerves, neuron, or any other cell, for example, any other cells. So here is the bigger picture of the cell, which that's contain different type of receptor. So this, for example, here is the bilayer of phospholipids. This bilayer of phospholipid and outer region is known as the extracellular matrix, while the inside is the intracellular matrix. So on the other hand, remember that intracellular fluid and extracellular fluid. So this is the caffeine. Caffeine is the adenosine receptor A to AR. This is the adenosine 2A receptor, which that will be bind some other things. So on the other hand, the antagonistic receptor, adenosine and receptor antagonistic, which that will be bind. So here is the formula, chemical formula of the caffeine. So after this binding with the A to AR receptor basically, and after this binding, the intracellular domain contain trimeric protein. So the alpha, beta and gamma. alpha will contain GDP, will activate by the GTP, will lead to activate the adenosine. So the adenosine will be activate. After the adenosine activation will lead to increase the adenosine cyclase activity. That is the enzyme, which that is the membrane bound enzyme, and in this way is bind, and in this way the stimulation lead to ATP conversion into the cyclic AMP. So remember, cyclic AMP is the second messenger which that will lead to target differently. For example, the nerve impulse through a calcium channel opening, and on the other hand the nerve impulse, on the other hand, important thing you should need to understand, the glucagon release due to the cyclic AMP, and there are a lot of things for catabolism. So here is the taste receptor 2, which that is used for the during the consumption, which contain a G alpha synthase enzyme containing intracellular domain, which that will also trigger the adenosine cyclase. While here is that directly can be entered through a pores or directly entering, which that will lead to phosphodiesterase enzyme inhibition. Why? Because the phosphodiesterase enzyme used for the inhibition of the phototransduction by the production of AMP, adenosine monophosphate, but it will be inhibited, so the cyclic AMP will be produced. The cyclic AMP is used for the phototransduction, for more light absorption and more nerve impulse, for the more alertness and more sympathetic nervous system, for alert and vision improvement. So remember, and the activation and deactivation will lead to tachycardia in the heart and mental excites, neutrophil degranulation, and due to the neutrophil degranulation, and bronchodilation, due to the respiration will be more, so the bronchi will be dilated, more respiration, so the sympathetic nervous system. And cyclic AMP will lead to stimulate the protein kinase A. This protein kinase A, which that target the different protein for the transcription factor as well as activation of the transcription factor protein, and decrease inflammation due to cytokines inhibition. So it can be decreased. But important thing you should need to understand, it will also lead to inhibit the cell proliferation and cell growth. So that means the apoptosis can be occur. So that is the detox antioxidant, and it can be detoxify our body cell, which that will be damage the cell, will be detoxify and apoptosis. So on the other hand, here is another receptor which that is bound with again trimeric subunit, again that mechanism, and alpha subunit will be released after the binding with the caffeine. So after this it will be activate to alpha GTP, and this alpha GTP the phospholipase C, which that will be activate after the activation to increase the protein kinase C again, which that will lead to trigger the IP3 pathway, and IP3 pathway is very important for increase the calcium level, and this calcium level will when increase to increase the impulse and muscle contraction and alertness. So remember, after this it will lead to increase the L-arginine for the production of nitric oxide synthase enzyme used to nitric oxide production, and the SGC will increase the cyclic GMP by this trigger mechanism, and that means the L-arginine used for the vasodilation and the phagocytosis of the virus by macrophage. So that is why the phagocytosis of virus by macrophage will be occur. So the inflammation clearance through a cyclic guanosine monophosphate triggering. So the guanosine monophosphate also is also triggering, and in this way the vasodilation, and there is a lot of things, and mTOR complex C1 which that will also inhibit, so inhibition will lead to apoptosis. So that's all things about the caffeine stimulation. And the caffeine is used for the vasodilation and sympathetic nervous system for more active and more alertness. Thanks for watching. Bye.